Good afternoon. Welcome to the IPDAE webinar, Expanding and Extending Learning Through a Community of Practice. My name is Ann Morgan, and I'm the Adult Education Coordinator and AGE Grant Manager for Pinellas County Schools, CTAE. I'm very excited to be with you today to discuss a project we started last year in Pinellas County. You should be able to see our question and answer screen. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box, and I will answer them as we go along if I can, and also at the end of the presentation. Today's presentation is being recorded, so encourage your colleagues to access it on the IPDAE website. It should be available within 48 hours. Often, we attend trainings, but don't always have the opportunity to utilize the information right away. And I know personally, if I don't tailor those great ideas and strategies to my own students and classroom protocols fairly quickly, the information sometimes, unfortunately, can fade away. In Pinellas, we were searching for a way to share the IPDAE webinars and workshops by expanding the reach to teachers who didn't have the opportunity to attend face-to-face trainings, and by building on the webinar's effectiveness by creating lesson plans that could be utilized in every classroom. In the webinar today, you will learn about the process we use to create a local community of practice based on information from IPDAE webinars. The first webinar on the high impact indicators identified by the GED Testing Service was a wealth of information and gave us some important relevant data and practices we wanted to incorporate into our classrooms quickly. Another workshop we hosted locally, Train the Trainer Initiative, Building Capacity for Florida GED Programs, yielded even more strategies and foundational skills to emphasize with students. But how to tailor this information to meet our needs, from our one-room schoolhouse sites to our larger centers. In this session, we will explore how we were able to expand the usefulness and effectiveness of the great IPDAE webinars and trainings we all have access to by forming a local community of practice. You will learn about the process we used to bring together colleagues from several different sites throughout our county. Our goal was to create a research-based team to expand on and implement best practices from the field and to share with others through ready-to-use lesson plans. You know, of course, one of the best parts of any IPDAE webinar are the resources and lesson plans you receive. So included are several lesson plans our community of practice created. The concept of our community of practice began with an IPDAE webinar. Start with great trainings, I always say. On the IPDAE website under GED and Adult High School Webinars from November 18th, 2015, Bonnie Goonan presented GED Mathematical Reasoning High Impact Indicators. We were intrigued and wanted to know more about the high impact indicators and how we could incorporate these highly important identified areas into our curriculum. Attached to this webinar, you will see links in the left-hand corner. One says presentation, which is the PowerPoint for today, and one says handouts. If you haven't already done so, click on the handouts button and you will see one labeled high impact indicators, among others. You may want to print those out as we refer to them as we go along. In 2016, Pinellas hosted the IPDAE workshop titled above. This expanded on the information we already had about high impact indicators for mathematics, as well as the Reasoning Through Language Arts exam. We learned more about the performance level descriptors, the PLDs, which explain the skills students must demonstrate to score in each of the possible performance levels on the GED test and GED Ready exams, and how they are useful tools for the classroom. You can also use PLDs to determine when students are ready to test and to shape learning activities while adding perspective to lesson plans. Now, how can we translate what we receive from our colleagues at IPDAE, the research, the resources, and strategies into useful tools for a classroom teacher? This was the challenge. According to Etienne and Beverly Wenger Trainer, a community of practice is a group of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. I found this graphic from CalPro, CalPro is a great website if you haven't been on there. It's the California Adult Literacy Professional Development Project. And it seemed to sum up exactly what we wanted to do in Pinellas. CalPro refers to a community of practice as blended instruction with the following description. Participants meet face-to-face and also online to receive guidance and support in implementing new practices in their schools and agencies. Before, between, and following their face-to-face training session, community of practice members access additional online resources and participate in activities designed to extend their learning and support new practices with their learners. So let's examine these 4 elements in more detail. The domain, the area of shared inquiry and of key issues, improving adult learners' transition to post-secondary. For us, this meant how to use those high-impact indicators to drive instruction and improve passing rates on the GED exam. Community members, professionals committed to a process of collective learning oriented towards achieving outcomes and improving practice. We have so many committed professionals in Pinellas, as I'm sure most of you do in your districts also. I knew it would be difficult to select just a few members to serve. But I also knew our final deliverable would be a notebook of ready-to-use lesson plans based on those high-impact indicators, and something that was easy enough for even a part-time teacher to utilize in his or her classroom. I tried to focus on teachers I knew were already using lesson plans regularly, or had previously shown a skill set for creative and innovative ideas, or people who just love to collaborate and share strategies with their peers. Investigation. Professionals committed to investigation of key questions, problems, and gaps, identification of resources and expertise, sharpening of subject knowledge through professional learning and development of new resources, process, and methods. And I just want to say here, thank you, IPDAE and the GED Testing Service. Much of this part, certainly the identification of key ideas and resources, had already been given to us through the webinars and workshops, highlighting those high impact indicators. So that part of our job was a little easier. We knew we would be producing our own resources and lesson plans as a final product to share, though. But it was nice to have the things to pull on. We were able to kind of get through that part pretty quickly. Continuous improvement. And finally, reflection on practice, evaluation of impact and outcomes, ongoing inquiry, refinement of practice and methods, development of new resources. You may not know, but Pinellas is a very large district. We have over 80 full-time and about 150 part-time teachers in adult education, including ABE, GED, and ESOL. We're spread out across 52 miles in a densely populated district. If you've ever been on US 19 in Pinellas on a Friday, you know what I'm talking about. We have over 35 different classroom locations. So our meetings would need to include face-to-face, but also online collaboration to be successful and effective. I knew this was an equally important part of the community of practice. So being so spread out, we tried to do a lot of things online and by email, which seemed to work pretty well. So now we had the materials from the IPDAE webinars and workshops, knew what we were going to do, and what deliverables we wanted to have at the end of the project. Those were the easy parts of the process. How to form the community of practice, select highly motivated members, explain the expectations and desired outcomes, create an easy-to-use lesson plan template, form a process to share and collaborate along the way. These were all parts of the project that I wanted to have ready. I wanted to master before we had our first meeting. So I did a lot of background information and did some research and things before we ever had our first face-to-face meeting. Now, how to recruit members. Since there were 21 high impact indicators, I decided I would need about 5 to 6 teachers, with the expectation each would produce 3 to 4 lesson plans and be able to have time for participation in our community of practice. Currently, our district adult education does not require lesson plans from its adult instructors. Instead, we use a highly prescriptive, differentiated approach to teaching based on results from TABE testing and other diagnostics. Though most ABE GED classroom instructors utilize several modes of instruction, including computer lab, whole group, small group, one-on-one tutoring, some, but not all, of our instructors still use lesson plans, perhaps from their previous K through 12 world experience, but some of them actually do lesson plans and turn them into their administrators. So this is where I started my recruitment process. I also wanted to assign subject area experts to each of the 4 areas on the GED exam. So I enlisted 2 math teachers and others with backgrounds in language arts, science, and social studies. Since we are so spread out and each of my members were at different locations, a demonstrated ability and motivation to collaborate with others was also essential. My final criteria was to access teachers who seemed to go above and beyond. You know, those ones who always attend the trainings when they're offered, had successful student outcomes, always seemed to ask questions, ones demonstrating a thirst for knowledge or they always want a desire to improve their craft. These were the attributes I was looking for in my community of practice members. Expectations and outcomes, always an important part. Before we started, I created a list of expectations and outcomes for our first meeting, so everybody would be on the same page. I asked each member to agree to dedicate at least 20 hours to our project over the course of 3 to 4 months. I thought an hour or so each week would be a good average, but they could spread it out however it was convenient for them. Once we met, we mapped out some dates for our final face-to-face meeting and dates for conference calls if they were necessary, or just check-in dates for emails. We also exchanged email addresses and phone numbers so there would be an open and easy communication between members. Target dates for our deliverables, the lesson plans were set also. Each teacher was given a lesson plan template to use that we had created, so all our lesson plans would be uniform. Our district recently adopted the Marzano teacher evaluation system. I know some of the other districts in Florida are using that also. So we made the template Marzano compliant. We thought that would not only encourage more teachers to use the lesson plans, but they would be able to use them for their evaluation observations, things like that. So it included every element that Marzano requested in those observations. Finally, since we were asking for lesson plans as deliverables, a small stipend was paid to each teacher based on the 20 hours. In our district, we pay $20 an hour for stipend payments, so $400 for each member, which I secured from our AFLA grant. That's always convenient when you're the AFLA grant manager, that you can plan those kind of things. Our group now needed to decide who was going to create which lessons and how many each teacher would create. You know, we ended up with 6 members and we had 21 lesson plans. So we had to kind of decide how we were going to divvy those up. Forming a team of professionals was very important. And again, we wanted to be sure they were familiar with the lesson plans, that they had that subject area expertise, the ability to communicate, and the demonstrated interest. Here we are. I lost my place there for a minute. I must have hit the wrong arrow key. Let me introduce you to our Pinellas County Adult Education Community of Practice participants. As I mentioned earlier, we tried to match up content area with teacher skills. And two of our best math teachers, Cindy Glenn and Vicki Sains, were our math experts. They divvied up the 6 high impact indicators for reasoning with mathematics. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, there's 6 math and 5 of each of the other subjects. So we discovered that the math indicators in particular were much heavier in content than the science, the social studies, and the RLA, especially considering prerequisite skills that are often required to do the lesson. So that doing 3 lesson plans apiece would just about equal doing 4 of a reading content area. Angelina Carroll took on the RLA lessons. Maria Wallen did some science and some social studies, as did Mark Haverfield. Cheryl Shaver tackled our social studies from a thematic unit perspective and included extra resources and handouts. We asked that each lesson include at least 2 activities for practice and the use of a video when applicable to introduce the subject matter. We've found that videos, if they're short and succinct, capture the student's interest. They're very good at explaining the objectives and the things that you're going to be doing with the lesson. And it makes it a little bit easier for that part-time teacher. They can just click on the video, they get the information, and then they go into practice with the activities. So that was basically what we required of each lesson plan. After our initial meeting, our group started their research looking for materials and resources to include. Several of the participants worked together and were able to have someone to discuss ideas and share good resources and strategies. My expectation was that since there's so many websites that include handouts relative to our indicators, that teachers should not have to create their own websites, worksheets, but they certainly could if they wanted to do so. We scheduled our process checks via email and phone communication along the way, with a final deadline to turn in those lesson plans within 2 months. We met again to reflect at the end of the project, which revealed some common issues and insights into the collaborative process, and we'll talk about those in a little while. I just want to let you see what our finished product, it doesn't look as impressive on the screen there, but we put everything in a binder, and the binder is separated by subject area, and includes 1 lesson plan for each of the 21 high impact indicators. And we included a flash drive with copies of all the handouts and resources. So if teachers wanted to add things to those or put additional things on there, they would have everything on that flash drive. Initially, these were introduced at a district training, and every ABE GED teacher was given one for their classrooms. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Not only did teachers now have ready-to-use lesson plans to aid instruction, targeting those identified skills from the high impact indicators, but since they were Marzano compliant, they could use them for evaluation observations. Another learning extension happened at our summer symposium that year. Each summer, we host our own mini conference of best practices and teacher-led presentations. The COP participants got to try out their lessons on teachers that year, which created quite a bit of buzz and excitement. And this was before we handed out the binders at the district-wide training in the fall. So over 100 teachers were in attendance for that symposium. They got to see firsthand that our community of practice lessons were accessible and fun and easy to utilize. And I think that giving them that little preview and showing them how the teachers use them kind of got them really excited about actually getting that binder. You know, I don't know how excited teachers get about, oh boy, a binder of lesson plans, but that seemed to kind of get them excited about the whole project. Now, this is the template that we used. Again, it's a little bit different than the IPDAE lesson plan template, but it contains a lot of the same elements. It's based on the Marzano teacher evaluation model, and it is in your handout section. We revised it slightly to integrate into that IPDAE model, but many of the sections and elements are the same, as you can see. The top section of the lesson plan identifies the subject area along with the specific high impact indicator, the materials needed, the planning for vocabulary and differentiation, as well as the formative assessment monitoring for learning. And then the second part, the lesson delivery section, contains the blueprint for the direct and modeled instruction and guided and independent practice strategies. So this is actually one of the ones that we included. It's on the high impact indicator, ratios, proportions, and scale factors in the real world. And you can find that on the IPDAE website under GED lesson plans. And you can see we have the prerequisite skills on there, and then the actual Q.3.C, which is that high impact indicator that we were targeting for that lesson. Now, what are high impact indicators? If you haven't been fortunate enough to watch that video or learn about them, I'm sure you've heard some things about them. So why do we do this at all? Why are we even using these high impact indicators? Those are drawn from the GED assessment target indicators, which describe the critical thinking skills essential to test taker success in college, career training, and the workforce. We wanted to highlight these indicators, believing that they would be very useful for educators to emphasize in their instruction. We also targeted these indicators because they represent particular foundational skills that are the basis for the development of other skills covered in the GED assessment targets and have broad usefulness that can be applied in multiple contexts. They're a good fit for classroom instruction because they're not complicated, but they're important for students to know and use. And the GED testing data suggests that educators may not be currently focusing on these skills in their GED test preparation. So we thought that's a great way to start, and you know, with the hope again that we would be helping to raise our GED passing rates if we could focus on some of these skills that the GED testing service data has identified. So here's an example of a mathematical reasoning high impact indicator. This is Q1 and Q3. And if you look at them, you can see there's several things within that indicator, the bulleted areas. And so our lesson plans for this round of the community of practice focused on one of these within those 4 or 5 for each indicator. So I thought that's great because we could continue this project each year and picking other ones, other indicators. So it seemed to be a good way to do it. You do have a PDF copy of these, and you also have a couple of other things, the relationship between the high impact indicators and other indicators, which is very helpful too. Another thing you might notice here is that this only lists Q1 and Q3. Where's Q2? Well, Q2 exists for sure, but it wasn't identified as a high impact indicator, but still equally important. But again, we were focusing on these specific ones, but that's why you don't see everyone listed. So now let's dive deeper and look at one of the high impact indicators I revised for this webinar. When our community of practice first met, we established some criteria we wanted to include with each lesson, as I told you. Knowing how busy our classroom teachers are, we wanted to be sure everything would be included for them and ready to use. I asked the members to find that PowerPoint or that video to introduce the lesson. And as I said, using videos can be quite an engaging way to introduce the content. And really, why recreate the wheel when there's so much out there already? And again, we wanted at least a couple of activities and worksheets for them to practice those skills. and they could be teacher made or found on the internet. But again, as I was doing this, I just can't believe the wealth of things that are already out there that hit every one of these indicators. It's just so easy to pull them down. We also wanted to be sure there were additional extension activities for students who might want a bit more practice. Now, I didn't include these things in the IPDAE revisions for this webinar, since they're unique to our classroom. But the lessons that we used also included pages of the books that we have in our printed resources, and lessons that were in the software that we use, particularly in our classrooms. So once the teacher did these lessons and used those activities, they could go to some of our books that they have and software programs and get more practice. So that was something that we included, but again, not everybody has the same resources. So that was a good thing for extension activities. So here's one of the lessons from our community of practice, and I thought we would kind of go through one. I'm just going to show you some of the elements of it. This particular one is on graphing linear inequalities. And it's funny because a webinar, or a face-to-face training I just had with Ron Cruz a couple of months ago, he talked about this particular one and how this is one that, though it's fairly simple, it's just something that the students struggle with a little bit. Not a complex task, and once our students understand the process and recognize the symbols and vocabulary. I know while I was in the classroom for 18 years teaching math for 2 hours each day, I found that many of my students just didn't understand the language and the symbols of math. The processes and algorithms were often not that difficult. It was just recognizing what to do or understanding how to proceed to solve the problems that stymied them. So this again is, you can see the prerequisite skills that we talked about, and solving equations for one, because it delves into that a little bit, but just to be able to identify that vocabulary and graph things on graphing an inequality on a number line. So that's where we started. So in that IPDAE lesson, here's the objectives. We're going to review that vocabulary related to the lesson, and we'd like to discuss real-world applications on inequalities. Showing them those symbols. I think most of the time they're familiar with some, but not all for inequalities. We wanted them to be able to identify one variable inequality graphed on a number line, graph a one variable inequality on the number line, and write a one variable inequality. So those were our goals and objectives. Of course, since this was a math lesson, we always include some prep activities, if necessary, to review any underlying foundational skills we may need to emphasize before addressing that high impact indicator. In this case, some basic evaluating expressions, solving simple one variable equations, and even a review of some signed number rules. This lesson includes an introductory video from Anywhere Math and practice worksheets from 3 different websites that I found I just love for math. Math Worksheets for Kids, CUDA Software, and Math Aids. As I keep saying, there's so much out there to pull from, just about any lesson you may want to do. And I reminded my community of practice members to always be sure to give credit where credit is due and include the correct hyperlinks and check them for accuracy. I know one of the frustrating things is you have a hyperlink for more information, you click it and it goes nowhere. So I wanted to be sure if they were pulling things from a website, they gave absolute credit and make sure that it was the right website and still accessible. So vocabulary, that thing that I say that is so important. This is one of the handouts with this lesson. Very simple and took it, see, this came from Math Aids. It's a great site. It allows you to access free worksheets, grades K through 12, and you can actually create them to your own specifications. I pull content from there frequently as the worksheets are clear and easy to understand. This is the one on basic symbols. And in the lesson plan, we encourage the teachers to go over each one, pointing out the open and closed circles for greater than, less than, and greater than or equal to. Also talking about the direction that the arrows point in, whether it's in a positive direction or a negative direction. And, that's always a good thing when you hate for them not to be able to do the problem because they just don't understand what that looks like. So another part of the IPDAE lesson plans is that connection to the real world. Each lesson starts with kind of a brainstorming session. What are inequalities? How are they connected to us? When would we use an inequality in real life? Not only does that make it more meaningful and easy to remember the concepts, but also demonstrates how important math concepts are in their daily lives. That oft repeated phrase, why do I have to learn this stuff anyway, fades away when you can show them exactly how it does affect their lives. An example from this lesson, I'm splitting a pizza with 4 friends and there are 10 slices. We want to eat and be fair. How many slices can I eat and be fair to all? If X is the number of slices I can eat no more than 2.5 slices, or X is less than or greater to 2.5. That kind of connection. And when we actually practiced this lesson with some students, some real life students, they were able to come up with all sorts of examples that probably they'd never even thought of as an inequality. So, and with those varying levels of student knowledge and skill sets, you always need to review all the underlying concepts, even something as simple as the number line. This might be a good time to review some of those sign number rules, especially as they relate to inequalities, like, for instance, reversing the inequality sign when multiplying or dividing by a negative number. There's actually a review sheet on those concepts right before the extension activities in your lesson plan on the website. So start out simple. This is one of the handouts that comes. Again, I think this is from Math Aids, another fantastic website that we've used the resources. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Excuse me. This is Math Worksheets for Kids. I know the kids label is a little distracting, but the free worksheets are simple, easy to read, and basic. Great for introducing the skill and for differentiating instruction for those lower level learners. Plenty of practice available too for students needing more of a challenge. Here, students simply identify the graph that matches the inequality. So for the first problem, note which answer choice shows X is greater than or equal to -2. So I might refer back to that vocabulary page. I mentioned that since it's showing greater than or equal to, you're looking for a closed circle, which eliminates answer choices 1 and 3. And we can see the arrow needs to show greater than, so a positive direction, which eliminates answers 3 and 4. So, of course, always trying to do at least 1 or 2 problems with the students to kind of get them going. And as with all the worksheets that we have in any lesson, there's the answer sheet. We don't want the teacher to have to try and figure it out on their own. So, and again, you can see at the top of the page, it tells where the worksheet was created. It gives the hyperlink so that they can go right to that if they want a little extra practice or a little more that way, just to kind of get going. And you can see, in case you didn't know, the answer choice was number 2. Here's another worksheet from another website that I love, CUDA Software. This is stepping it up a little bit of a notch, and I just put the worksheet and the answer sheet side by side, and again, giving credit to them, including the hyperlink. We just want to be sure that teachers have everything they need and can go on. And again, always do a couple of problems with them to kind of get them going. So now, after we get those kind of things done, we want to step it up a little notch. Moving on from identifying graphs and graphing inequalities to actually writing an inequality. And here, students simply need to write the inequality that matches the graph. I always do a couple with them, and when we looked at this one, we said, well, let's look at number 1. We can see it's a closed circle, so it's going to be certainly either greater than, less than, but also include the equal to, and it's pointing to the left in a negative direction, so it's going to have to be less than. So you can kind of see what we were doing there with the different worksheets. There's also a few extra ones included and some links to extension activities in your IPDAE lesson plan. Don't forget to debrief. This is always kind of sometimes I know when I'd get rushed in the classroom and I'm like, okay, I've done the lesson and they're doing the practice and okay, now we're checking our answers and we're all done and that's it and okay, see you tomorrow. Well, you've got to make sure that you bring that learning back. So included in the IPDAE lesson plan, of course, is some ideas for debriefing, some actual debriefing questions the teacher can ask. In this case, we were talking about inequalities and how they were the same or different than equations. What was the difference between those? We'd ask them again to give a real world example using an inequality, and making sure they understand that vocabulary. What is the difference between an open circle and a closed circle on a graphed inequality? Using a number line, graph an inequality with a negative number and with a positive number. And go ahead and write us a one variable inequality and share it with your neighbors in your classroom. Extensions, again, throughout the lesson, we're always checking for progress, making sure they understand each new concept. I always did allow students to work in pairs, especially with those lower level learners, helping them build confidence and share knowledge. There are several resources available on the internet, as well as in the GED preparation materials, which will give students more practice with GED type questions that deal with inequalities. Included in this lesson are those 2 extension activities, and you can see those when you pull it up. They can be used for higher level students to practice their solving and graphing inequality skills. I always try and end my lessons with some real world connections that engage the students' interest and help them remember those skills. So again, bringing that lesson back to the real world, not letting them say, what has this got to do with me anyway? And, I would always remind them, well, it's on the test. So, it's always a good thing to do that. You saw the one from math, but the other ones that we have listed here, if you'd like to take a look at those. For science, we have forming a conclusion. For social studies, we have systems and forms of government. And for reading and language arts, we did one on using transition words to improve your writing. So again, being able to take what we got from IPDAE, those workshops, those face-to-face trainings, and to be able to bring it back to all those teachers. I mean, every one of them has these binders. I actually, and I'm not making this up, I got 2 emails about a week ago from teachers saying, are we going to do some of the other high impact, those other bullets in those high impact indicators? Because, they've used all these and now they're looking for more. And of course, I referred them to the IPDAE website because there are a lot of other lesson plans on there too. But that is one of our things that we're thinking of doing. Of course, another thing that we'd like to do for one of our next projects in Pinellas, and I suspect many of the districts out there are doing the same thing, we're going to create a community of practice for particularly, we're going to start out with math, for those CCR standards. They're included on tab 11 and 12 coming up. So I'm actually, for that project, I was thinking I'm going to ask for people that are math certified, and perhaps one from each one of our 8 main centers, so that we can get some good, and with the idea of creating, again, some lesson plans that are targeting those CCR standards on the tab 11 and 12. I don't know how other people feel out there, but I was just sharing with June that we're a little nervous in Pinellas, and and you know, the trainings that we're going to need to be sure that our teachers are all up on these new standards in TABE 11 and 12. There's some interesting things in there, and we just want to be sure we're ready. So that's one of the projects that we're thinking about doing for next year. And I've already written it into the AFLA grant, so we're going to be ready for that. And wow, that was pretty whirlwind. We're at the Q&A section now. And just wondering if anybody has any questions, comments. I do see one question. Oh, it's a compliment. Thank you, Donna. That's one of our teachers. Well, if there's no other questions, I am going to turn it over to Miss June. Oh, wait, there is another question. Are these lesson plans only available for teachers in Florida, or can teachers from other states get them? I think IPDAE is available to anyone. Yeah, actually,
all free and available to anyone.
Okay. Am I seeing any other questions? Where do we get printouts from the presentation? Ah, that's a good question. Well, on the IPDAE website, if you go to webinars, you will see this webinar listed. I think it's, if not the top one, it's next to the top. And you can download the PowerPoint now without me yakking in the background. And you can, you also, the handouts that I referred to are there. And those other lesson plans, you can just look them up by title and they'll be listed there.
Well, Ann, thank you so much. I mean, the information that you provided today was so useful, and it's so evident of the amount of work that you and your staff have put into this. So we really compliment you in Pinellas County, and we look forward to hearing about more things that you're doing there. And really, anyone out there that would like to share some of your promising practices with us, just give us a call. But before we close today's webinar, we would just like to take one more minute of your time to answer just 3 short survey questions. You can see that the questions now appear on your screen. So go ahead and give us your responses. It should only take you about 1 minute. Okay, we'll go ahead and close the poll now. And I want to thank you again, Ann, and thank all of you out there who participated today with us. We hope that you can join us next Wednesday, May 30th, for an ABE Math Curriculum Framework map. I think you're going to really love this interactive map that we put together. It's a really great versatile tool for planning for instruction and definitely for specific remediation. So until then, I wish all of you a great rest of the day, and thank you again for tuning into IPDAE's Webinar Wednesdays. See you next week.